So, to complete our introduction to the Abramelin process, we will bring it roundabout. We've had about, over half a dozen introductory segments, and of course, with time allowing, at each point I've gotten mails of questions which can later be answered by the next point, so I figure most of the questions can be answered by taking a look at all the highlights of the process that we haven't covered thus far for some people. So, this information is coming out of Book 3 of the Book of Abramelin, which is in the German edition that the Ibis edition is translated from. There's 4 books total instead of the 3 in the Mathers edition. Okay, so we'll just go over some of the highlights. Chapter 3 is the age and qualities you'll need, and basically he says to be, as far as age, to be over 25 and less than 50, ideally, to undergo such a process, and to be of good health also, being that there's a lot of fasting and whatnot involved. He then goes on to explain that all the other grimoires, ones that involved all the incantations and seals and so forth, are fraudulent. He then goes on to explain, that was chapter 4. Chapter 5, he goes on to explain how, and 6, that there's no real special times for magic, as far as days, planetary hours, all stuff like that. And we mentioned this in a prior segment, that the power of God is always available, not specifically when the hour is in Jupiter or so forth. One of his reasons being that for example, in the hour of Jupiter on a Thursday, which would be the most significant psychic threshold, for lack of a better word, for the energetic manifestation of Jupiter, Jupiter may not be visible at that time, or and whatnot. So he finds that those forms of staging are kind of ludicrous. Chapter 7 describes the first 6 months of the art, and interestingly, the first 6 months, the second 6 months, the third 6 months, 18 months altogether, not much changes as far as the process or what you're doing, except that it intensifies. For the first 6 months, you get used to a more mild sense of stoic life and sensitivity and whatnot, and then as that becomes the norm, as your consciousness begins ingrained into that, the next 6 months you push it up a little more, become more intense in your work, and finally the third 6 months is it's just more intense. The book suggests starting the first morning after Passover, and each morning a half hour before dawn awakening to go to the east window in the prayer room to pray to Adonai, which is Hebrew for Lord. And we've gotten into, in some of the Greenleaf segments on the Merlyn Stone channel, we've gotten into some of that as far as the definition of Lord versus absolute God creator and whatnot on the planet. If you're to be married, he suggests that the first year of marriage is best, mostly because of the patterns and the things that you can, after 10 years of marriage, it's hard for one or the other to start undergoing a path like this, and it's an individual path. So even if both decide to undertake it, it's very solitary. Abramelin, Abraham, I guess, would recommend removing all children from the house except for infants if necessary. And also the thing with the marriage and relationships is the arguments and the uncleanliness. That's the big issue as far as the energies and whatnot involved with the process. And then letting go of all worldly obligations, living simply, quietly, eating and drinking little, trying to avoid monetary business and whatnot. Managing daily life. Now this is interesting because it talks about independence and being able to refrain, if possible, from business groups, conversations, the emotions involved with each, obligations, and then the book actually points out that, and it uses all examples because it says Abraham, Jacob, Moses, David, Elijah, Christ, John, Abramelin, and all wise men took themselves to the hermitages and the desert and lived a solitary life until they acquired the wisdom. Not meaning that you have to do this for life or that you have to become a priest and stay in a monastery for decades on end, but to attain it at one point is to know it and to be able to always know it. And so the process of which requires almost what we would call in our today's age deprogramming. Deprogramming being that the conditions, the obligations, the roles, the social status, the ego, the encounters we have with people, arguments over money. It specifically addresses in the Book of Abramelin, like for during this process, if you do have to deal with like financial transactions and you are shortchanged a little bit. I mean, in most cases, I would say, with the psychic energy of suppression, no, don't let it go. But in this case, it's not worth the energetic flow of the money situation, of what's the argument, the energy taking place, the debate, the vibrations, the frequency, whatever words or understanding. This is I just decided, since it was of popular request, to use the Abramelin process as an example, but this is not specific to an Abramelinism form of work. This is pretty standard for spiritual living. It recommends not sleeping during the daylight hours, not for any real metaphysical reason, but for the fact that it might promote laziness and sloth, which morning, noon, and night, which is kind of a funny expression because we use it as in doing it all the time. But yes, morning, noon, and night, the mage is to retire to, this is the first time we're using the White Room to shoot a video in, because we'll be using it for videos on more ceremonial processes. But to retire away from things of the world, to be able to get in touch with that God self that in this system is described as the holy guardian angel, which is not necessarily a separate entity. It even at one point describes it as almost our true spiritual soulmate, that through the course of a process of living a devoted, pious, spiritual life, that we can come into contact with that. And I think the 18 months, it's going to be, everybody progresses at a different rate, at a different progress, in their life. So that's, I think, one of those things that it's negligible, I suppose. But we'll get into a few more things before we move on with introducing another segment, since obviously we need people to start working on this process before it's worth discussing the magic.